an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, brought to you by Jill, covering Six of Crows. Chapters 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. In these chapters, turns out somebody knows about this plan and is determined to fuck it up. But Kaz had an inkling that this was going to happen because Kaz don't trust nobody. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Natasha, and I had been saying how this had tended to break up nicely into 3-chapter increments for 50 pages, but then we ran into a bunch of chapters that were a little bit shorter because they it was a high action sequence, and so she jumps in between a bunch of different points of view in order to give us multiple perspectives on exactly how that violence has affected everybody, which I thought was a really effective tactic for handling this. Inej is the first chapter. I'll tell you who all the perspectives are. Chapter 10, Inej, 11, Jesper, 12, Inej again, 13, Kaz, 14, Nina, 15, Matthias. And we actually get to find out a little bit more about what happened with Nina and Matthias. We don't get the main event. We don't find out exactly how she betrayed him. I mean, he says it in general, like you said, you claimed that I was a slave trader, but we don't find out what led to that or exactly how it went down. So I'm hoping that we'll get a little bit more detail on that later on. And we also get some an unusual sort of display of emotion from Kaz. I feel like Kaz is a teeny tiny bit in love with Inej. Or at the very least, he feels such loyalty to her that the fact that she got her on his watch is like hitting a sore spot with him because of whatever happened with Geordie. It's Geordie, right? Not Georgie. So let's talk about Inej. She has 2 POVs within this chunk that I did. And the first one is her talking about how she's watching Kaz like assemble his plan, but that he obviously never ever is foolish enough to show every aspect of his plan to anybody. And I think it's interesting that Wyman is it Wyman or Wylan? He is the only one that we haven't gotten a POV of so far. And I feel like that either means that he is the leaky part of this plan, or it means that he is supposed to be the one we suspect of being the leaky part in this plan. Because I have a hard time believing that we could be in everybody else's head and they never think about the fact that they betrayed the crew if they did. So for now, I'm holding him in suspicion, but I'm also aware that might be a red herring. But yeah, Inej is kind of like flipped out at the fact that Kaz seems so sure that they could take on a job of this size. And she warns him about getting a little too arrogant, and he's just like, yeah, you know what? If I want a sermon, I'll come to you. But for right now, and I mean, there really is a point where a leader sort of has to be arrogant with something of this nature, like this risky, because that's how you get people to follow you, right? Is you make it seem like their failure isn't even an option. It's not something that you're concerned about at all. That's how unlikely it is. So I appreciate her prudence, but she is not a good leader for reasons like this. So finally, she basically tells him, like, well, you should listen to me because you need me. And he's like, I don't need you. I need your skills. And this makes her so irritated. because he's saying that she can be replaced. She's acting like she is so priceless that there's nobody. And like, yeah, she's probably the best at what she does. She's literally called the Wraith because she's so good at hiding and popping up out of nowhere and whatever. But if he has to do the job with somebody else, he can make it happen. And I don't think he would. And I think this is an empty threat, but it's obviously a point of pride with her. And that's kind of what I like about Inej, is that like, she's got this, like, I want to do my best even when I'm doing something terrible, which I relate to on a very deep, uncomfortable sort of level. It's just this like drive that you have when you're an overachiever to do better than you need to do, and even do well when you really like shouldn't care, you still do because it's your name on it. She just has this streak of pride there that I find kind of interesting, and that it informs everything. So we get to see in this section on Inej some of her history with her parents. She had parents who were very much in love with each other. And her father tells her about how women may like flowers, but only one woman loves the scent of gardenias in late summer that remind her of her grandmother's porch. Only one woman loves apple blossoms in a blue cup. Only one woman loves wild geraniums. And I love that moment, because even if he's too poor to give you any of them, it won't matter, because he will have taken the time to know you as no one else does. Only that boy earns your heart. And this is something that I really couldn't put my finger on a lot when I was younger, was guys going through all of the right motions in relationships, but never really feeling like they, it wasn't satisfying, and not understanding why. Bringing me red roses on Valentine's Day. Well, that's a nice gesture, and it's certainly traditional, but I don't like red roses. I never have. I find them kind of upsetting looking. They're just dark. And things like this, that once I was with Owen, and he understood me so well that it was difficult, to get exactly what you wanted and know how to react to that, because you get so trained to just be grateful for anything, that when somebody comes at you with the exact thing because they get you, it's almost like I don't know how to describe it, but there's this moment of, oh my God, it's almost like a moment of real vulnerability, realizing that somebody has seen you. So I just really like this moment. And she is lamenting this because her father said that there would be men who were vying for her heart. But it turns out that it had just been dudes with money, because she had gotten roped into the menagerie. We don't find out exactly how she wound up there. I really don't want to know, to be honest. She's one of the few characters that her backstory seems so depressing in a lot of ways that I feel like it's the one that I could do without. And the description of the menagerie is just so gross. It's just exoticism and what's the word I want? Not tokenism. That's not it at all. But it's fetishizing based on physical attributes. It was known as the House of Exotics. If you had a taste for a shoe girl, or a Fjerdan giant, a redhead from the Wandering Isle, a dark-skinned Zemini, the menagerie was your destination. Each girl was known by her animal name: leopard, mare, fox, raven, ermine, fawn, snake. Suli seers wore the jackal mask when they plied their trade and looked into a person's fate. But what man would want to bed a jackal? So the Suli girl, and the menagerie always stalked a Suli girl, and notice that verb, stalked, was known as the lynx. Clients didn't come looking for the girls themselves, just brown sooty skin, the fire of Kalish hair, the tilt of golden shoe eyes. The animals remained the same, though the girls came and went. This is so gross in so many ways. Like, the didn't come looking for the girls themselves. You know, there's a real romanticized viewpoint that I think a lot of us cling to in order to comfort ourselves, that men who come to brothels develop relationships with the girls and start to come to the same ones because they like care about them in a way. And that is just so often not the case. And I feel like a lot of the, when we see sex work in media, it's often white women. And because of that, we miss out on seeing this aspect of it, of being sought because of your nationality or skin tone or whatever. And how dehumanizing that is. That, like, they don't give a shit about you. They don't give a shit. And that's going to be an element in some sex work anyway, of course, because somebody is just looking for a warm body. But it's a particular kind of gross when there's this like added racial aspect. So the combo of they didn't come looking for the girls themselves, and then the fact that, you know, you come in as a Suli girl and you wind up with the same name as the girl before you who is now gone. Who knows why she's gone, but there's probably more than one girl named Mare or Fox or whatever. And Inej is super fucked up over this. Like, she keeps trying to tell herself that it's not a big deal as she's walking by it, that they can't hurt me anymore, that I'm not part of this. I am the wraith. People are afraid of me now. I don't have to be worried about going back there or what I owe anybody. But it doesn't work. Like, she's still, when she gets faced with Tante Helene, which is what they call the madam, the owner of the Peacock, this woman is able to cow Inej in a way that nobody else can because of her being abused. She calls her Lynx. And there's something, like, I know I already was talking about the fact that all the girls share the same name, but when I was listening to the audiobook, it was in my mind, the names of the animals were at least capitalized. Once I sat down and looked at the actual text and realized that Helene says, "Oh, no, you don't, little Lynx," it's not capitalized. When they're talking about these girls, it's a lowercase, like, just animal word. This is not a name exactly. It's just a category, which just made it so much more upsetting somehow. So she says, like, she's essentially threatening that I could get you back in here fetching a good price. I know what you're worth down to the cent. Cobbett, maybe we should take her home now. You wouldn't dare, said Inej. The dregs, I can bide my time, little Lynx. You'll wear my silks again, I promise. She released Inej. Enjoy your night, she said with a smile, then snapped open her blue fan and whirled away into the crowd, Cobbett trailing after her. So, yeah, again, exactly how did she just get captured? Was it purely like a human trafficking thing? What exactly happened? And how the fuck is this bitch gonna have the balls to do this to somebody that Kaz is in charge of? Like, I feel like Kaz seems to command a fair amount of fear from most people, and she doesn't have that, evidently. So I want to know what the deal is with their relationship there, and how she thinks that, I mean, I was going to say how she thinks that she can threaten Inej and Kaz won't come and kick her ass, but really, in that case, Inej would have to tell Kaz, and I don't think she's telling anybody about these kinds of interactions, because it just fucks her up too much. So, all right. So that's one of the main things that I wanted to talk about was that moment, because I really like how it's written, and I like the fact that Inej is trying to make herself feel better by like clinging to her knives, and that doesn't really work. It sort of like comforts her for a second, but it doesn't do enough. And so she like rushes over to the pier. And the boat that they're supposed to take is called the Farallend. And they're all meeting there to get aboard. And when she gets there, she notices that there isn't anybody in sight. And she's sort of wondering, like, where is everybody? Am I late? And then she stumbles over somebody, and she looks down, and it's a body. She saw Dirix, one of the dregs who'd been meant to make the journey with them. There was a knife in his abdomen, and his eyes were glassy. So they're already down one guy, like, right away. And just as she yells Kaz to, like, warn him, because she doesn't know where anybody is, the fucking boat that they were supposed to get on explodes. And we find out later, via Jesper's POV, that this was not the boat. Kaz was aware that... That's the wrong word. Kaz didn't know somebody was going to betray them. Kaz always knows that people betray each other. This wasn't a specific instance of him having information. This is how Kaz functions. Does not trust anybody. Does not trust one plan. He always has a backup plan. Several backup plans, more than likely. And is constantly suspicious of everybody, and therefore tells nobody his whole plan. And it turns out to pay out in dividends here. This is a hugely smart move that he made. And I have been impressed with Kaz, of course, like you're meant to be. But this, more than anything, really cemented it for me that this is a kid who, the fact that he's 17 and managing to pull this kind of shit off is pretty impressive. So Jesper, his POV, Jesper always felt better when people were shooting at him. It wasn't that he liked the idea of dying. In fact, that potential outcome was a definite drawback. But if he was worrying about staying alive, he couldn't be thinking about anything else. And there's a lot of, info about Jesper here, but a lot of it we sort of knew already. Jesper has a gambling problem. And getting into gunfights and gambling are like the only two things that seem to give him any sort of rush. And I kind of wonder, like, it could have gotten out of this situation if he hadn't gotten into so much debt. But I kind of wonder if he did get out of debt, he wouldn't leave the dregs anyway, right? I just don't, like, this is what he does. There are certain people that maybe they put themselves into a situation where they can't get out because they need an excuse to stay. And I kind of wonder if that's not what's going on with him. So he sees Wylan, so it is Wylan, and this kid is curled up on the ground with his hands like over his head, flipping out as there are explosions and gunfire. And when he asks, "Do you know how to shoot?" the kid says, "Skeet," and he's like, "All right, this is just like shooting clay pigeons. They make a different sound when you hit one, but whatever," and gives the kid a gun. And this is when we find out from Kaz that Farallend was a decoy, the first one that they saw. So they are trying to get to Berth 22, which is where the actual boat is that they're going to be taking. And Wylan is, he's just not doing great. And Jesper, obviously has a certain amount of loyalty. They're on the same team. He's not going to let the kid get killed, but he is sort of leaving the kid to his own devices more than I think some people would in this situation. Out of sheer frustration, I think probably hoping that if he does that, the kid will pull it together and prove himself a little bit more. So, Helvar was beside her because when they get there, he sees Nina. With his back to the crate, his hands bound. A reasonable precaution, but the Fjordan was valuable, and Jesper had a moment to wonder why Kaz had left him in such straits before he saw Nina produce a knife from her sleeve and slash through Halvar's bonds. She slapped a pistol into his hands. "Defend yourself," she said with a growl, and then returned her focus to the fight. Not smart, Jesper thought. Do not turn your back on an angry Fjordan. Halvar looked like he was seriously considering shooting her. Jesper lifted his revolver, prepared to bring the giant down. Then Halvar was standing next to Nina, aiming into the maze of crates beyond. Just like that, they were fighting side by side. Had Kaz left Matthias bound with Nina deliberately? Jesper could never tell how much of what Kaz got away with was smarts and planning, and how much was dumb luck. That's the sign of somebody who's really good at their job, right? Like, when people really are just like, are you that good? Or, I think that's mission accomplished right there. So he gave a sharp whistle. Nina glanced over her shoulder and her gaze found Jesper's. He flashed 2 fingers twice and she gave a quick nod. And he's wondering as he does this, because he's signaling her that it's birth 22. And he's like realizing as he does it, she might have known already, because there's no telling what Kaz told to who. So he thinks that he's giving her new information simply because he's the one that just heard it, but it might not be new to her. So here comes Wylan. They pound down the dock, get to the ship, and then when they get this kid, Wylan, he starts working on something, and Jesper's trying to keep an eye on everything. He goes up the rigging with I think he has his boots on still, which makes it really hard for him to climb, and almost falls. But by being up there, he has a huge advantage on shooting everybody. And then as he is up there, Wylan asks him to close his eyes. And he's like, "What? No, what are you talking about? Just do it. This better be good." He shut his eyes. "Are they closed?" "Damn it, Wylan. Yes, There was a shrill, shrieking howl, and then bright light bloomed behind Jesper's lids. When it faded, he opened his eyes. Below, he saw men blundering around, rendered blind by the flash bomb Wylan had set off. But Jesper could see perfectly. Not bad for a Mercer's kid, he thought to himself, and opened fire. So Wylan can do some shit. It's just maybe he's not at the level he had thought he was. I am curious, though, for everybody who he did not get to tell to shut their eyes. That's still going to damage things on their side. But what are you going to do? Inej's next chapter is a lot of action, so I'm going to skip most of it because it's just details about how the fight's going down. But basically what happens is that she gets grabbed by somebody, and it turns out that they are part of the Black Tips, who is the crew that Kaz humiliated in like the second chapter of the book. And they're trying to act like this is just payback, that the only reason that they came after them here was because he humiliated them, but that doesn't really add up. Like, it's just too specific a strike. They had too many people with them, and it was like they were coming after, if they were trying to come after Kaz alone, that might feel more like, oh, it's a personal vendetta. But they're trying to take out everybody and the ship. Like, the whole deal is just not lining up. And she manages to get away from the guy, but it is a really close thing. She's got a knife built into, it's sort of a, trying to remember what movie it is where somebody has, is it just James Bond or something else? But she has some knives built into her shoes, and she manages to kick him in the groin, and he starts to bleed really badly and goes down. But he had already stabbed her, just misses her heart. So she's in a pretty bad way, and she thinks that she's going to be able to climb away initially. But as she starts, she's losing so much blood that she really loses her strength quickly. And she thinks that she's about to be scooped up by one of these dudes and has her dagger out, ready to stab herself in the heart. when, surprise, surprise, it's actually Kaz. I really like this moment because Kaz, like, the two of them just have such a weird relationship. She asks, did we win? As he's, like, carrying her. I'm here, aren't I? He must be running. Her body jounced painfully against his chest with every lurching step. He couldn't carry her and use his cane. I don't want to die. I'll do my best to make other arrangements for you. She closed her eyes. Keep talking, Wraith. Don't slip away from me. But it's what I do best. He clutched her tighter. Just make it to the schooner. Open your damn eyes, Inej. She tried. Her vision was blurring, but she could make out a pale, shiny scar on Kaz's neck right beneath his jaw. She remembered the first time she'd seen him at the menagerie. He paid Tanta Helene for information, stock tips, political pillow talk, anything the menagerie's clients blabbed about when drunk or giddy on bliss. He never visited Helene's girls, though plenty would have been happy to take him up to their rooms. They claimed he gave them the shivers, that his hands were permanently stained with blood beneath those black gloves, but she'd recognized the eagerness in their voices and the way they tracked him with their eyes. And then, just a quick aside, somebody, I think it was it Lee? In the group for Spoil Me, somebody shared the illustrations from the beautiful special edition of Six of Crows, and it turns out that, like, Kaz is super hot. So I really like that picture in my head now of, like, him being this, like, weird, aloof dude, but also extremely attractive, that all these women are like, you know, there's that allure, that mystery, danger, everything. And I was trying to, like, cast somebody in my head to play him, and I cannot think who I would cast. I would be interested, if any of you are listening, to hear who you would cast for Kaz. But then it continues. One night, as he'd passed her in the parlor, she'd done a foolish thing, a reckless thing. I can help you, she'd whispered. He glanced at her, then proceeded on his way as if she'd said nothing at all. The next morning, she'd been called to Tanta Helene's parlor. She'd been sure another beating was coming, or worse, but instead, Kaz Brecker had been standing there, leaning on his crowhead cane, waiting to change her life. I can help you, she said now. Help me with what? She couldn't remember. There was something she was supposed to tell him. It didn't matter anymore. Talk to me, Wraith. You came back for me. I protect my investments. I'm glad I'm bleeding all over your shirt. I'll put it on your tab. Now she remembered. He owed her an apology. Say you're sorry. For what? Just say it. She didn't hear his reply. The world had grown very dark indeed. So then, Kaz's POV. I really like when we get into Kaz's POV, and he's thinking back on the fact that she asked for an apology. He's not like, who the hell knew what she thought she deserved an apology for? He thinks she wanted an apology, but for what? There were so many things. Like, I really, really liked that. Kaz is not a fool. He is not somebody who, like, is without empathy. He just knows how to shut that shit down. And he has enough of it to be good at his job, because if you don't have empathy, then you fail to understand where threats could come from, because you don't know how to think like the average person. And when you do something, you risk retribution. There's always an equal and opposite reaction, right? But if you don't have empathy, then you're not going to be able to predict what that is. You're not going to be able to, like, look back at old lessons and understand why things happened the way they did. So the moment where he admits to himself that she has plenty of reasons to be angry at him is pretty satisfying. So Kaz brings Nina Inej to Nina. Sorry, I'm getting their names mixed up here in my head. And Nina is a little bit concerned about trying to heal Inej, because the type of work that she does for healing is a little bit more basic. And this kind of in-depth, like, internal organ injury and bleeding, this is not something that she often does. So she is going to do her best. And she clearly really does care if Inej lives or dies. Like, this isn't just a job for her. Like, she's a little bit at a disadvantage, to be honest, by the fact that she cares. But Kaz is really taking it hard that she's been injured. And again, one could think that it's because of the fact that she's an investment, but I don't think it is that simple. Kaz stepped back into the passageway. Inej lay perfectly still on the table, her luminous brown skin dull in the swaying lamplight. He was alive because of Inej. They all were. They'd managed to fight their way out of a corner, but only because she'd prevented them from being surrounded. Kaz knew death. He could feel its presence on the ship now, looming over them, ready to take his wraith. He was covered in her blood. Say you're sorry. That was the last thing Inej had said to him. What had she wanted him to apologize for? There were so many possibilities. 1,000 crimes, 1,000 stupid jibes. So Jesper is just like, so what the fuck? And, This motherfucker, Wyland. We were ambushed, Wyland said. Private tutors from the university, and that's what this kid comes up with? We were ambushed? Wyland reddened. Stop calling me kid. We're practically the same age. You're not going to like the other names I've come up with for you. I know we were ambushed. That doesn't explain how they knew we would be there. Maybe Big Bolliger wasn't the only black-tip spy in the dregs. Giels doesn't have the brains or the resources to bite back this fast or this hard alone, Kaz said. You sure? Because it felt like a pretty big bite. Let's ask. Kaz limped over to where Roddy had stashed Ooman. I stuck your wraith, Ooman had giggled when Kaz had spotted him curled up on the ground. I stuck her good. Yeah, this doesn't go well for this guy. I have to be honest. I had a real Tywin Lannister moment here where I was very glad that Kaz handles this the way that he does. Is it brutal and cruel and ruthless and cold-hearted and violent? Oh yes. Most def. But you don't let this kind of person walk away after this kind of confrontation. Nah. Like, how soft-hearted would you look? Oh my God, there's no way. There's no way. He had no other option in this universe. Like, this is what he had to do. So, Kaz tortures this guy. He does this with the help of Jesper. Jesper holds him down. Kaz has a knife and slashes across Ooman's eye from brow to cheekbone, and before Ooman could draw breath to cry out, he made a second cut in the opposite direction, a nearly perfect X. Now Ooman was screaming. Kaz wiped the knife clean, returned it to his sleeve, and drove his gloved fingers into Ooman's eye socket. He shrieked and twitched as Kaz yanked out his eyeball, its base trailing a bloody root. Blood gushed over his face. Kaz heard Wyland retching. He tossed the eyeball overboard and jammed his spit-soaked handkerchief into the socket where Ooman's eye had been. Then he grabbed Ooman's jaw, his gloves leaving red smears on the enforcer's chin. His actions were smooth, precise, as if he were dealing cards at the Crow Club or picking an easy lock, but his rage felt hot and mad and unfamiliar. Something within him had torn loose. So here's my theory. You know, I had said before that it could just be the betrayal. It could just be that he feels like Inej depends on him the way that this other kid, Jordy, obviously had at one point, and that this is a bit of a repeat of a traumatic thing for him that he still feels guilty about, and so the guilt is like fueling some of this, and I still think that might be an element. But what I really think is going on here is that he doesn't realize that he's in love with Inej. That he doesn't realize the depth of his emotion and that it's coming to the surface because she's hurt. This guy did it. And this guy, not only did he do it, but he's been caught and yet he still has the fucking gall to taunt Kaz about it, which is really unforgivable. Like, this dude, the fact that he had the balls to throw that in Kaz's face really goes to show that even though people are afraid of Kaz, they don't seem to quite have the measure of what he's capable of. So Kaz tells him, tell me who the fuck hired you, and if you do, we'll give you money and you'll be able to go see a medic and get home, and that will be our kindness to you. If you do not, I will just take your other eye and then continue interrogating a blind man. So finally, who hired you? Whoever it was can't protect you now. He'll kill me, and I'll make you wish for death. So you have to weigh those options. Pekka Rollins, Uman sobbed. It was Pekka Rollins. I feel like I'm supposed to remember who this is. Forgive me. And there's nobody in the chat right now to help me with this. But even through his own shock, Kaz registered the effect of the name on Jesper and Wyland. Helver didn't know enough to be intimidated. Saints, groaned Jesper. We are so screwed. Is Rollins leading the crew himself? Kaz asked Uman. What crew? To Fjerda. I don't know about no crew. We were just supposed to stop you from getting out of the harbor. I see. I need a medic. Can you take me to a medic now? Of course, said Kaz. Right this way. He took Uman by the lapels and hoisted him off his feet, bracing his body against the railing. I told you what you wanted, Uman screamed, struggling. I did what you asked. Despite the Uman's knobbly build, he was deceptively strong, farm strong, like Jesper. He'd probably grown up in the fields. Kaz leaned in so that no one else could hear it when he said, My wraith would counsel mercy. But thanks to you, she's not here to plead your case. Without another word, he tipped Uman into the sea. Now, Wylan does not take well to this, because he's a child who doesn't understand how things work, and because Kaz has been shielding him from how things work purposely in order to boost his confidence and get him onto this crew. He tries to argue with Kaz about this, that you shouldn't have done this. Kaz like, I'm going to throw you overboard. And he says, you won't, you need me. And Jesper says to him, Wylan, maybe your tutors didn't cover this lesson, but you do not argue with a man covered in blood and a knife up his sleeve. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think that's a good life lesson. I think that's, I think that's sound advice, sir. Wylan pressed his lips into a thin line. Kaz couldn't tell if the kid was frightened or furious, and he didn't much care. Helvar stood silent sentinel, observing it all, looking seasick green beneath his blonde beard. Kaz turned to Jesper. Fit Helvar with some shackles to keep him honest, and let me get clean clothes and fresh water. Since when am I your valet? Man with a knife, remember? He said over his shoulder. Pekka Rollins. The name rattled through his head like gunfire. It always came back to Pekka Rollins, the man who had taken everything from him. So this is the guy that Kaz walked by and thought to himself brick by brick, I think, right? Oh yeah, because it says brick by brick a second time. Killing Pekka Rollins had always been tempting, but that wasn't enough. Kaz wanted Rollins to be brought low. He wanted him to suffer the way Kaz had, the way Geordie had. And snatching 30 million Kruger right out of Pekka Rollins' grubby hands was a very good way to start. Maybe Inej was right. Maybe fate did bother with people like him. So, all right, he's now like, money was a good enough reason, but now he's like personally invested in this because his arch enemy is involved. So that's interesting. And then we have the last chapter here, or actually, no, sorry. I keep thinking of it as the last chapter because it's Nina and Matthias, and the two of them are having a conversation together. So it's kind of like one scene that we sort of see from two perspectives. It starts out with Nina alone, and she is remembering, her training and thinking about the fact that she was trained to be a heart render, somebody who kills and uses their knowledge of the human body and their ability to manipulate it to kill rather than to heal. So a lot of what she's doing here is her just trying to feel out the opposite of what she normally does. And this makes her think back to what it was like when she was in school and how she got where she is. So, first she notices the tattoo on Inej, and something that I hadn't considered, because I feel like the tattoo had been mentioned before, the crow and cup tattoo, but Inej doesn't have it. It's the dregs tattoo. She got the one for the menagerie, like, burned off of her, but the one for the dregs she never got. So it's interesting. She says, alliances shifted this way and that in the barrel, but your gang was your family, the only protection that mattered. Nina herself bore 2 tattoos. The one on her left forearm was for the House of the White Rose. The one that counted was on her right, a crow trying to drink from a near-empty goblet. It told the world she belonged to the dregs, that to trifle with her was to risk their vengeance. Inej had been with the dregs longer than Nina, and yet no tattoo. Strange. She was one of the most valued members of the gang, and it was clear Kaz trusted her as much as someone like Kaz could. Nina thought of the look on his face when he'd set Inej down on the table. He was the same Kaz, cold, rude, impossible. But beneath all that anger, she thought she'd seen something else too. Or maybe she was just a romantic. She had to laugh at herself. She wouldn't wish love on anyone. It was the guests you welcomed and then couldn't be rid of, which is a pretty good line. And then she thinks of Zoya Nazyalensky, a powerful squaller, gorgeous to the point of absurdity, and capable of reducing Nina's confidence to ash with a single raised brow. Zoya was essentially a, what amounts to a general of this resistance that Nina had been involved with. Nina had been part of this crew that tried to find Grisha, who were captured or on the run and hiding during this war that had started, and find them safe places to go, smuggle them out. The Grisha triumvirate, the ones who run the Second Army, what's left of it. Ravka's Grisha soldiers had been decimated during the war. Some had fled, most had been killed. Nina rubbed her tired eyes. Do you know the best way to find Grisha who don't want to be found? Never gave it much thought, he said. Look for miracles and listen to bedtime stories. Follow the tales of witches and goblins and unexplained happenings. Sometimes they were just superstition, but often there was truth at the heart of local legends. People who had been born with gifts that their countries didn't understand. Nina had gotten very good at sniffing out those stories. Seems to me if they don't want to be found, you should just let them be. This is Jesper talking to her. Nina cast him a dark glance. The Druskel won't let them be. They hunt Grisha everywhere. Are they all charmers like Matthias? And worse. I need to find his leg shackles. Kaz gives me all the fun jobs. Want to trade? Nina asked wearily. The frenetic energy of Jesper's lanky frame seemed to drop away. He went as still as Nina had ever seen him, and his gaze focused on Inej for the first time since he'd entered the little cabin. He was avoiding it, Nina realized. He didn't want to look at her. The blanket shifted slightly with her shallow breaths. When Jesper spoke, his voice was taut. The strings of an instrument turned to a too-sharp key. She can't die, he said. Not this way. Not what way? She can't die, he repeated. Nina felt a surge of frustration. Saints, Jesper, she said. I'm doing my best. Sorry, he said a bit sheepishly. He clapped her awkwardly on the shoulder. You're doing great. Nina sighed. Not convincing. Why don't you go chain up a giant blonde? So I really like this interaction. I like her assessment of Jesper. I like Jesper's reaction. Like, he's really trying to be encouraging and get along with everybody. And when people reprimand him, it seems like he's got some self-awareness, which I always appreciate and admire. And here, the Grisha triumvirate hadn't just wanted to save Grisha from Fjerdan witch hunters. They'd sent missions to the Wandering Isle and Novji Zem because Ravka needed soldiers. They'd sought out Grisha, who might be living in secret, and tried to convince them to take up residence in Ravka and enter service to the crown. Nina had been too young to fight in the Ravkan civil war, and she'd been desperate to be a part of the rebuilding of the Second Army. It was her gift for languages, Shu, Kalish, Suli, Fjerdan, and even some Zemeni that finally overcame Zoya's reservations. So we get some story here about all of the different things that she would do, going into bars and stuff and eavesdropping, as she puts it, listening for bedtime stories, tracing back families that are hiding in caves or people who have abilities that are, just all of this. And she winds up having a day where she gets yelled at. Zoya is a tough bitch. And, Nina was young and prideful. And when she got yelled at for taking some unnecessary risks, she decided to walk away, as many of us do when we get, criticized, rather than make a response of any kind, because often there's not really a good way to respond to things like that, especially if you know that they might have a point. She just stalks away and winds up walking right into a camp of Driscoll soldiers. And it turns out that the Driscoll are basically Nazis, but for Grisha. They think that Grisha are not even human, that they are demons of some kind, or at least a plague sent by demons. And their whole MO is, we're going to capture you and then pretend to give you a trial, and then we're going to burn you alive. And our goal is to make sure we get all of you and rid the world of your presence, which is super fun and not a bummer at all. And yeah, this is apparently where she meets Matthias. And there's some dudes who are, threatening to rape her. And Matthias stops them, not out of any sort of goodness in his heart or decency or wish to avoid rape. He stops them because he thinks it's disgusting that they would be willing to have sex with somebody who is a demon, and asks if the dude would be willing to fuck a dog, to which one of the people in the crowd of soldiers asks, well, what does the dog look like? And it's a pretty tough moment of seeing we've seen the end, the fallout from whatever happened between the two of them. And they are now clearly enemies, or at least he thinks they're enemies, and she has not really formulated she wants to right the wrongs that she's done. So I don't think she sees him as necessarily an enemy, but certainly not a friend. And then you see the beginning, before what seems like an affection rises between them. So it's a really cold interaction, with him saying that he shouldn't have called her a dog because that's insulting to dogs, because they at least have loyalty to their pack and a sort of honor, which Grisha don't even have. And so, yeah, we haven't seen anything good between the two of them. And he agrees to save her life, evidently. We find out later that's how this started, that he was saving her, and whenever they got caught by somebody, she tried to save her own skin by saying that he was a slaver. So I'm really curious what happened to cause him to want to help her. Is it just love? Was there more than just her? What what happened? So yeah, liberating Grisha captives, she's in quotes, liberating. She's describing what the Driscoll do. The Driscoll had existed for hundreds of years, but under Broom's leadership, their force had doubled in size and become infinitely more deadly. He had changed their training, developed new techniques for rooting out Grisha and Fjerda, infiltrated Ravka's borders, and begun pursuing rogue Grisha in other lands, even hunting down slaving ships, liberating Grisha captives with the sole purpose of clapping them back in chains and sending them to Fjerda for trial and execution. She'd imagined facing Broom one day as an avenging warrior or a clever spy. She hadn't pictured herself confronting him caged and starving, hands bound, dressed in rags. Broom must have known the effect his name would have. He waited a long moment before he said, in excellent Kaelish, "What stands before you is the next generation of Driscoll, the holy order charged with protecting the sovereign nation of Fjerda by eradicating your kind. They will bring you to Fjerda to face trial and so earn the rank of officer. They are the strongest and best of our kind. When we reach Fjerda, you will be interrogated and tried for your crimes." And one of the prisoners says, "I've done nothing. I'm a farmer. I've done you no harm." "You are an insult to Djel," Broom replied, "a blight on this earth. You speak peace, but what of your children to whom you may pass on this demonic power? What about their children? I save my mercy for the helpless men and women mowed down by Grisha abominations." The Driscoll seemed ready to burst with pride. As soon as Broom exited the hold, they were knocking each other affectionately on the shoulders, laughing in relief and satisfaction. Then comes the conversation with Matthias. He asks about how she can speak his language, and he assumes that it's witchcraft. And she says, "If by witchcraft you mean the arcane practice of reading," which I really enjoyed that, like, kind of, she doesn't have time for this bullshit, you know? "How many Grisha are ever found innocent?" Nina asked. The fabricator groaned. "Don't provoke him. You won't sway his mind." "How many have you sent to the pyre?" He turned his back on her. That's basically the entire, like, she falls asleep, and when she wakes up, Matthias is there. And of course, nothing she does can please Matthias. Like, she starts to speak his language, and he doesn't want her to speak that. And then she asks, he says, "I don't want to hear my language from your mouth." His eyes flicked to her lips, and she felt an unwelcome flush. With vindictive pleasure, she said in Fjerdan, "But you always liked the way I spoke your tongue. You said it sounded pure." "Don't press me, Nina," he said. Matthias's Kirch was ugly, brutal, the guttural accent of thieves and murderers that he'd met in prison. "That pardon is a dream that's hard to hold on to. The memory of your pulse fading beneath my fingers is far easier to bring to mind." So, at this moment, Nina loses her temper and starts to fuck with his heart, which I didn't expect. Like, Nina, what are you doing, girl? And she stops. Finally, she, like, realizes that she's trying to punish him for being angry at her when she knows that he has every reason to be angry at her, that he has every right to be angry at her. And yet, she's still over here, like, fucking with his heart and just trying to put the fear in him again, as if he doesn't already know what she's capable of. And I just really appreciated that she finally, like, comes to her senses and is just ashamed of herself. You know, why am I doing this to this guy? The whole point of this was that I was trying to set this right. And then he says, "Kaz asked you if the White Rose would send a delegation to Hrinkala." Without saying a word, she pushed up the sleeve of her shirt. "You chose to work there?" "Chose is a bit of a stretch, but yes." "Why? Why would you remain in Kirch?" She rubbed her eyes. "I couldn't leave you in Hellgate." "You put me in Hellgate." "It was a mistake, Matthias." Rage ignited in his eyes, the calm veneer dropping away. "A mistake? I saved your life, and you accused me of being a slaver." "Yes," Nina said, "and I've spent most of this last year trying to find a way to set things right." "Has a true word ever left your lips?" "I've never lied to you. I never will. The first words you said to me were a lie, spoken in Kaelish, as I recall. Spoken right before you captured me and stuffed me in a cage. Was that the time for speaking truths?" I shouldn't blame you. You can't help yourself. It's your nature to dissemble. That's such a fucked up line. Like, just, yeah, well, you know, of course you're going to lie. You just can't help it because you're not even, like, in control of yourself because you're not a person. Ugh, gross. And then he tells her how he dreams of her every night and how he always, like, you know, how he tells her that he always dreams about killing her or that she's torturing, but he never tells her about, like, you know, the sex dreams that evidently pop up plenty of times. And Matthias is not somebody who's, like, experienced with being on a ship. So when we go to his POV, he's experiencing some humiliation at the fact that he keeps on vomiting over the side of the rail. He has some seasickness that he's dealing with. Someone had brewed coffee, and he saw the crew drinking it from copper mugs with ceramic lids. The thought to bring Nina a cup entered his head, and he crushed it. He didn't need to tend to her or tell Brecker that she could use relief. He clenched his fingers, looking at the scabbed knuckles. She had seeded such weakness in him. I like that. He's such a fucking pain in the ass, and he just, like, has such a decent heart that he constantly tries to quell. And there's something, like, it's wildly frustrating, and he's an idiot, but also, like, it's fun to read in a weird way. So Matthias is being asked by Kaz to draw more of the map and to give some, like, information, and he is holding back, which Kaz calls him out on. And he tries to be like, no, I'm not. But Kaz isn't an idiot, and also he's the one that holds the key to Matthias being free, and Kaz is like, I don't have to give this to you just because you're here with us. You need to actually hold up your end of the bargain, or else I'm not coming through. There's also this weird thing. He pulls out something, and I think it's Jesper, who says, what is it? One of Rask's new inventions. Wyland's head popped up. I thought he did demo work. He does everything, said Jesper. Wedge it between your back teeth, Kaz said as he handed the discs to the others. But don't bite down. Wyland started to sputter and cough, clawing at his mouth. A transparent film had spread over his lips. It bulged like a frog's gullet as he tried to breathe, eyes darting left and right in panic. Jesper started laughing, and Kaz just shook his head. I told you not to bite down, Wyland. Breathe through your nose. The boy took deep inhales, nostrils flaring. Easy, said Jesper. You're going to make yourself pass out. What is this? Asked Matthias, still holding the tiny disc in his palm. Kaz pushed his deep into his mouth, wiggling it between his teeth. Baleen. I'd planned to save these, but after that ambush, I don't know what kind of trouble we may run into on the open sea. If you go over and can't come up for air, wiggle it free and bite down. It will buy you 10 minutes of breathing time. Less if you panic, he said with a meaningful look at Wyland. So that's crazy. There's a thing they can bite full of oxygen that expands in their mouth that they can use as, like, essentially a portable, and I say portable as a portable scuba. The whole point of a scuba tank is that it's portable. But, you know, there's a ton of equipment involved. It's heavy. This is just something that, like, they hold in their mouths until they're ready for them. They just have to remember not to bite down, which seems like, as somebody who clenches her jaw frequently without noticing, I feel like I would completely ruin this. Like, this would not work out well for me. So he asks for names from Matthias, and it says somehow doing it himself felt even more treasonous. Part of him wondered if he could simply find a way to separate from the group once they got there, reveal their location, and thereby win his way back into the good graces of the government. Would anyone at the ice court even recognize him? He was probably believed to be dead, drowned in the shipwreck that had killed his closest friends and Commander Brum. Ooh, little detail there. I didn't even notice that the first time I read this. He had no proof of his true identity. He would be a stranger who had no business in the ice court, and by the time he got anyone to listen... You're holding back, Brecker said. So yeah, this whole thing, the argument of, I don't have to give you anything. So then he talks about how we have everything set up so that you can't get in, because he is arguing about what he knows of Kaz's plan, in through the prison, out through the embassy. And it turns out that what Kaz has planned is going up the incinerator shaft for burning the clothes of the prisoners when they arrive. It's a precaution against the plague. And when he realizes it's such a dangerous, crazy proposition. It's supposed to be Inej that does this, and she's not in really good shape. And this is all, she could be incinerated. I don't know what kind of window there is but Jesus Christ, this could go really badly. Jasper picked up his rifle. Why are we talking about scaling chimneys when we've got a bigger problem? And what's that? We have no business going after Bolu-Bayor if Pekka Rollins is involved. And when he asks who that is, Wyland says the biggest, baddest operator in all of Ketterdam. He has money we don't have, connections we don't have, and probably a head start. So Kaz gets real irritated at the fact that they are talking about his arch enemy as if he's some kind of god. And Matthias notices that Kaz, it's like he's taking it personally, the way that they're talking, and has a feeling that there is some sort of history there that maybe the others don't even know about. And I like the fact that Matthias is able to pick up on that. Just, he's a bit of a bonehead, but it seems like it's something obvious enough. So they continue talking about this plan, and there's this really great ending to this. Jesper knocked his head against the hull. Fine, but if Pekka Rollins kills us all, I'm going to get Wyland's ghost to teach my ghost how to play the flute, just so I can annoy the hell out of your ghost. Brecker's lips quirked. I'll just hire Matthias's ghost to kick your ghost's ass. My ghost won't associate with your ghost, Matthias said primly, then wondered if the sea air was rotting his brain. I liked that ending a lot. So that's what's going on. I'm just, I really want to see these Balines work, to be honest. And I really want Inej to make it through. And I want more of Kaz's POVs, of course. Kaz is like the Tyrion of this series, where he seems like he's on top of things. He's a good judge of character. He's smart. And you just want to see everything through his eyes because he's got the most info, pretty much. So the only better POV I could imagine would be Varys, and we never get Varys' POV. So, and I don't think there's a Varys in this book so far. So we'll see, I guess. But yeah, guys, so thank you so much again to Jill for commissioning this episode. I hope that you all have been enjoying the coverage. And yeah, it looks like there's quite a bit left of this book. There's 6 parts in all. Each part seems to have at least 6 or 7 chapters, sometimes almost 10. So probably take about 5 more episodes, I would guess, to finish this, depending on the length of the chapters. But this has been a lot of fun, and I don't know, there's something very D&D party about this, which I don't mean in a bad way at all. I actually have been enjoying that aspect of it, so I am excited to read more. So hopefully I will be doing that soon, and thank you to everybody who has been involved in commissioning this book. And I will see you all soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.